Hey guys, it's Mr. McMahon. Today we're going to be talking about the Aztec Empire. This is our second in three videos of native people from Central and South America. Last time we talked about the Maya, and today we're going to talk about the Aztec.
All right, so we are going to learn about the Aztec nation. Our learning objectives for the Aztecs is, first of all, hopefully you can identify their location. You'll be able to identify their form of government, their contributions in math, astronomy, and architecture, and you will be able to compare the Aztecs to the Maya and the Inca. So the origins of the Aztecs. So again, we go back to hunter-gatherers, and if you'll notice again in Africa on the far west side of your map, you'll notice that hunter-gatherers first left Africa about 100,000 years ago. And if you move to the east and you find bubble number 1, you'll notice between 12 and 15,000 years ago, they crossed the Bering Strait between Asia and North America across a land bridge we call Beringia. Then they migrated towards the south, and they ended up somewhere in Mexico about 12,000 years ago. Their location, if you see here on the map, we are in the United States in the northern part of this map. Below us is Mexico, and the Aztec Empire settled in present-day Mexico. So the Aztec, the place they settled in Mexico, we call the Valley of Mexico. And you know a valley is an area of land between two mountains. And so you can notice the mountains on either side here, and in the middle was a lake. And so we call this the Valley of Mexico. So in the Valley of Mexico, first of all, you'll notice that you have mountains in bubble number 1, so it's surrounded by mountains. Number 2, it can be swampy. It's pretty wet. Number 3, you do find lake or a lake between the mountains. And 4, you'll notice this is what we call terrace farming. The Aztec would have cut steps into the mountain and used this for their farming. The Aztec government, the capital city of the Aztecs, was called Tenochtitlan. We're going to look a little bit more about Tenochtitlan here in a moment. The leader of the Aztec nation was called an emperor, and he was considered a living god on earth. So what about Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital? So look in bubble number 1, again, it was in what we call the Valley of Mexico. It was surrounded by mountains, and there was a large lake. Number 2, this is what we call chinampas that we're going to look at a little bit later in the lecture. These are floating gardens in the lake so they could use it for agriculture. And then bubble number 3, this is what we call a causeway. Now, when you travel from Business 17 to Garden City, you cross a causeway over that marshy area. And so the Aztecs also built causeways to reach from the mainland to the capital city of Tenochtitlan. Now this is an artist description of Tenochtitlan. You'll notice in the middle you have the causeway. You'll notice in the top left you have the great temple where they would have performed human sacrifices. And then to the right and the left of the causeway you can see some ideas of some of the chinampas. And then surrounding this lake are the mountains. And so this is what we would call the Valley of Mexico, where Tenochtitlan was. So what about their social structure? Well, you had the emperor and his family, the nobles at the top. Below them are the common people, which would have been most of us here. Below them you had what we call unskilled labor. These are people who were not trained in a specific skill. So they were considered unskilled. They were not trained. And at the very bottom of the Aztec social structure, we had slaves. What about the Aztec religion? Well, first of all, the Aztec religion, like the Maya and the Inca, they practiced polytheism. Number 2, they were expected to pay tribute to the gods to honor them. And for those fans of the Hunger Games, you'll notice the word tribute, where the different areas would have paid tribute, or the tributes would have fought in the Hunger Games for the capital. And in bubble number 3, one way to pay tribute to the Aztec gods was to do human sacrifice. So Katniss and other tributes were almost human sacrifices to the capital. What about the Aztec agriculture? Well, first of all, let's remember it is in the middle of a lake, the Valley of Mexico. It's very swampy. So the types of agriculture we're going to find are going to be related to a lake. So number one, lots of different wild plants would have grown as Aztec agriculture. Fish would have been very plentiful being a lake, frogs, and finally the fourth bubble, ducks and other type of wildlife you would have found near a lake. Now, what do you get when you get agriculture? Well, when you get agriculture and you become very skilled at agriculture, number one, you get an explosion of population, so you get a lot of people. Number two, if you're good at agriculture, you become very wealthy off the sale of your agriculture. And bubble number three, with that wealth, you become very powerful. And the Aztecs became a very powerful empire because of how good they were at agriculture. What about their science and medicine? Well, you'll notice very similar to the Maya, they developed a calendar. And with this calendar, bubble number two, they would have used this to figure out when to plant crops and to harvest crops, so very important for agriculture. And number three, they would have used the important dates to practice their religion of polytheism. All right, so the Aztec culture or architecture they're building. Number one, you'll notice these are what we call the floating gardens. These are the chinampas. Since they were in a lake in a swampy area, their gardens floated. And then number two, the bubble at the bottom was the Great Temple, the temple they built to worship and pay tribute to their gods. So in these floating gardens called the chinampas, what are some things they would have grown? So number two, they would have grown corn in these floating gardens, the chinampas. Number three, avocados. They probably loved guacamole. Number four, different types of beans. Number five, chili peppers. Number six, squash. And finally, number seven, tomatoes. And all these were grown in their floating gardens called chinampas. But finally, the Aztecs do decline. And the first reason is they are defeated by a Spanish conquistador. His name is Hernan Cortes. He defeats the Aztec emperor known as Montezuma, and Cortes defeats him. Now, besides the fact that he defeats him because he has superior military technology like guns, also the conquistadors bring diseases with them. Bubble number two, they bring the disease called measles. Now, the conquistadors, being European, they had built up immunity to it. Their bodies had antibodies to fight it. The Native Americans did not. So many Native Americans died due to measles. Bubble number three, the other disease that killed a lot of Native Americans was smallpox. And if you notice the picture, it's quite disgusting of a disease and it looks pretty gross. So smallpox and measles were also a large killer of the Aztecs, along with Hernan Cortes.
So I hope you learned a little bit about the Aztec Empire today. Our next video in this series will be about the Inca, who are from South America.